Trev, can you just keep track of that, make sure that stays recording?
That's what I feel like.
I've heard that before. Okay, here we are. Strength training concepts. We're just going to breeze through the few slides that we got through last week. Keep in mind that none of these are doctrine. None of them are always the same. A little bit on breathing. Did I? I did. A couple of things. I wanted to address the conversation we had about breathing really quickly. I watched back over the video of last week's lecture, and 2 points I wanted to make. One, I never like to take that sort of macho attitude of, I said something along the lines of this is what weak people do, or this is what weak people use to explain this particular mechanism. That comes, I guess, from a little bit of frustration of the Valsalva maneuver being perceived that way, but I don't like to address things that way. So I went away and wrote a little bit more about using the Valsalva technique to address that. There's nothing really new here. Basically, no, it's not dangerous. As I also said last week, there's very little, surprisingly little, in the way of clinical research to support or dispute the Valsalva maneuver, particularly as it pertains to strength training. There is a decent amount written by Dr. Sullivan in this really great PDF that I've linked to here that explores the topic a little bit further. He goes into, I think probably the biggest takeaway here is this, if you can make sense of this paragraph, which is essentially saying that the increased pressure experienced in the arteries is balanced by the increased pressure experienced by your cerebrospinal fluid on the other side of the vessel.
Do you need glasses, bro?
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, that looks perfect.
Probably get a full screen.
Yeah, it's not. Can you do that for me, Trev?
Don't ask me to do it. It's like Apple will be ruined.
Did that make sense to everybody? What I just said. No. Basically, you've got pressure on one side of the vessel and pressure from the other side. The net effect has actually been shown fairly substantially to be protective rather than damaging, which is interesting. There was a lawsuit involving some people who got into trouble in the gym, had some stroke-like events, and some of the data used by the lawyers representing those people was extrapolated out to show these levels of probability, which, as you can see, are fairly low. This one, SAH, is just the technical terminology for one of these events. They occur every 70,000 life years of time spent in the gym. Not very frequent. What's this? Let's put these in over the weekend. So, oh yeah, this was just kind of demonstrating, this is particularly good, showing the force vectors of arterial pressure netting out against the pressure of spinal fluid, being one of the sort of major mechanisms that's overlooked when we just measure arterial pressure increasing, sometimes up to 50 or 100-fold on normal levels. Anyway, the Valsalva maneuver. hopefully we've covered that in sufficient depth. Any comments on that? Anybody? No? Good. Let's move on. Grip. Spoke about this a bit. Pretty straightforward. Not going to go over it again. Anyone care to show me what this looks like practically? You can just sort of ghost through it with your hands. Essentially starting internally rotated and externally rotating your palms onto the bar that you're gripping, right? Like Dani said. Easier to show on a barbell, but hopefully you get the picture. This is all a very technical way of saying simply that. Phenomena of irradiation. Remember, this is the way that we leverage our central nervous system and increased activity in our central nervous system to improve strength. And we do that by doing things like gripping the bar really hard, attempting to bend the bar over our back, and also by spreading the floor between our feet, things like that. Sneaky little coaching cues to leverage irradiation. Bar path. This is kind of the beginnings of our discussion of biomechanics, right, as they pertain to strength training. And bar paths generally are most efficient when they're linear. I still haven't changed that, except in the bench press, and that's not quite true, for these reasons. This is still just stuff that we covered last week, guys, so that's why I'm just running through it quickly. A sort of visual demonstration of how moment arms work. Are we all feeling pretty good about what a moment arm is and what torque is and how it relates to exercise prescription? Bullshit. I don't believe you. Everyone feels good about moment arms, torque, and how they relate to exercise prescription. Thank you. Cool. So let's talk about it a bit more. Basically, torque is the ability of a force to rotate a lever around some fixed point. Okay? Torque is the ability of a force to rotate a lever around a fixed point. And if you think about that definition, it should become clear why we work more in torque than pure forces, because we are levers, right? Our body's made up of levers. Everything that happens when we lift weights needs to be expressed in terms of torque around the joints of the human body. So that's why it's a really important concept. Lever systems have a fulcrum, which you can also refer to as an axis. Here's just some of the sort of variables that we talk about the most. Force is generally spoken of as kind of your muscular force. The force arm is the distance from where force is being applied to the joint center. And then you have resistance, which is the bar or whatever weight you're trying to interact with. And the resistance arm is the distance from the weight to joint center. A mechanical advantage is when you have a longer lever, you have more leverage, right? That's fairly intuitive. Like if you think of a wrench working on a bolt, the longer the wrench, the easier it is, right? Because you've got a longer lever to work with. Does that make sense? Same thing applies in weightlifting and strength training. That's why lifting a weight like this is easier than lifting a weight like this. It's because the attachments of the muscle don't change. So the muscle's lever arm doesn't change. But the weight enjoys a much greater lever arm when your arm's out here, right? If you're carrying a dumbbell out here, the lever arm for the weight is much, we refer to it as the resistance arm, is much, much longer than if you keep it close to your body's center of mass. That's why those types of movements are so much more difficult. We spoke a little bit about third-class levers. Can someone succinctly define what a third-class lever is? I'm not coming down on you guys today because we only just briefly went over this last week, but does anyone want to give it a shot? Come on, Danny.
Yeah, so you got, if you're using your fulcrums here, resistance is here, and the force against resistance is up here, so closer to the fulcrum.
Yep.
So that means...
That's good.
That's it?
That's it.
Cool.
That's how you can define a third-class lever, and I recommend you just use the exact example that Dani just gave. Just use your elbow. Think about the attachments of the bicep. This means you need to know that the bicep attaches roughly here, right? The radial tuberosity and the bicipital aponeurosis. And then the weight is out here. And if you know that, then you can define what a third-class lever is, because you know that it goes axes, then force, then resistance, in that order. That's what defines a third-class lever. Different levers would look like force on one side of the fulcrum, and then resistance, or fulcrum, resistance, and then force. But the vast majority of levers are third-class levers. And what that means is that generally, the lever arm, which is denoted here just by that tiny little red line, that's our force arm, right? That's the amount of leverage that our bicep has is much, much shorter than the lever arm enjoyed by the weight that we carry. And so that means in order to overcome this weight, our bicep is not lifting, let's say that's a 10 kg dumbbell. Our bicep is not exerting 10 kg of force to lift that dumbbell. It's lifting some exponentially greater number because it also has to overcome this lever arm. Does that make sense? At least kind of just at a very high level? Yes? Kind of? We'll continue to go over it. Here's a schematic that Matt found that helped him learning his biomechanics. And I included as well, it's a more complicated force diagram than the elbow. It's looking at the body as a system and the various lever arms during something like hip flexion, like a squat, for example. And so this straight line is what? What is that?
Center of mass.
It's your center of mass, right? Midfoot. Center of mass in a standing human. And so either side of that, you have levers. Right? You've got a lever for the knee, between the knee and that lever. Between the knee and your center of mass. You also have a lever between your hip and the center of mass. You have a lever between your spine and your center of mass. I would recommend making yourself familiar with this much, much simpler diagram of a lever system before you try to start analyzing a full body system of levers. But that's in there in case you get to that point. It is very interesting once you can wrap your head around it. Just some thought questions. So I've just kind of answered these for you, but this will help when you're going through your review to ask yourself these questions. When you lift a weight, does the weight ever change? Well, no, it is just the weight. It doesn't change. But what about the muscular force required to move the weight? It does change, because when it's down here, the weight has no greater leverage than the muscular lever. But as soon as you come out to say here, now Our biceps lever is only about this long, but the weights lever is that long. That's why holding a weight out here is much, much more difficult than holding it down here, right? These are some of the ways that we can explain biomechanical phenomena. Does it only need to overcome the weight on the bar, that being the muscular force? Does it only need to overcome the weight on the bar? Or no, it needs to overcome the weight and the length of the lever enjoyed by the weight. Yeah? Does the required effort stay the same throughout the movement? No, it doesn't, for the reasons we've just explained. And then you can have a go at rationalizing why that is for all the reasons that I've just explained. I'm going to leave it at that for today, but I do want your honest review of whether you understand this concept after today. And if you don't, we'll spend some time talking about it. Not sure what I'm talking about there. Okay, back to safer topics, right? Strength exercise choice rationale. JJ, what's your rationale for choosing particular exercises over others?
Just
Not from that.
Oh no. Just like in general, when I'm at the gym, why do I do what I do?
Why do you do one exercise versus another?
Well, it depends what I'm training.
So you're not doing squats to train your biceps? No?
Is that not how it works?
I'm just wondering, trying to extrapolate this thought process.
What? I like to go compound movements first.
Why?
Just cause. I don't know.
Just cause,
Just
right?
cause-
We just know that that's
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's good. But it's not
Um,
explicit, is it? It's just sort of, we're still just basing that off of intuition.
Yeah.
Anything else? You prefer compound over isolated, which I
First.
love
like
it.
towards the.
Okay, so
Then
you're
part
just
of the
talking about order of operations, saying
Yeah.
compound first, isolated last. Yeah, I
Yeah.
also tend to agree with that most of the time.
That's basically it.
That's about it, right?
That's what I do. Yeah.
And that's like across the board for most fitness professionals. Imagine what lay people are doing when they get into the gym. Just any number of random assortments of exercises, right? Whatever they feel like on the day, they're exercising, they're not training.
Whatever they've seen in the gym.
Yeah, they've seen someone muscular doing something, they've said, hey, dude's jacked. I want to be like him, I'm going to do the exercises he's doing. Forgetting about genetics. Rookie mistake.
And a 10,000 calorie diet.
Yeah. All of those
10
things.
meg a day of
Yeah.
testosterone.
Yeah.
This might be, for me, the most important slide in shift, right? In the curriculum that we go through. This one slide might be the most important. Because it gives you a thought process to go through when you analyze an exercise, which is a big part of our job, right? Big part of our job is making sure that we're delivering the very best in exercise programming, the most effective exercise programming choice. Here are some ways to do that. Making sure that it involves multiple joints, uses a high degree of the available range of motion, it loads the core, and it has a high weight bearing potential to allow for, years and years of progression. Yeah. Make sure you know these guys. Okay, this is about where we left off, I think. The squat. My favorite movement to train. It allows us to load heavily, takes the hip and knee through full appreciable range of motion. There's significant stress placed on the midsection to support you and the bar that's riding on your back. that ticks all of the boxes based on the rationale that we covered on the previous slide. Comes in 3 flavors: low bar, high bar, front squat. Each has its own unique mechanics, which we'll cover in a minute. One of the nice things about the squat, as opposed to, say, something like the deadlift, is that it allows us to train the stretch reflex. Does everyone know what the stretch reflex is? Stretch reflex is just where you use passive tension in a muscle belly to develop more force. We'll go over length tension relationships a little bit later on, but essentially it's where, think of muscles as a rubber band. When they stretch, they build passive tension that you can then use to shorten.
Does everyone understand active, passive, what we say here? So everyone's clear. Right, when we're doing a bicep curl, what's the active muscle or muscle group there?
Bicep.
Yeah, bicep active, yeah. And passive.
Tricep.
Yeah, it does, yeah. The tricep gathers passive tension during a bicep curl. Doesn't quite apply to this performance use that we're talking about here though, right? If you wanted to use the stretch reflex in a bicep curl, you'd want to hit the bottom of your rib and quickly use that tension built through the bicep to raise your arm back up. You might even swing back a little bit like this and use that passive stretch to develop more force. And in fact, you'll see people doing that in the gym, right? When they're lifting heavy, their bicep curls, maybe they use a bit of body English, as well as developing an extra stretch through elbow extension to get more force out of their biceps. They do it without knowing, but what they're using is the stretch reflex. We covered this, right? Closed being an acute, open being an obtuse angle. We use those things to describe the hip and knee during different movements. We spent a little bit of time discussing the implications of how your body sets up under different bar positions across a low bar, high bar, or a front squat. Does anyone want to talk about that some more? We feel pretty good about that. I thought that was pretty good. That was an interesting discussion that we had. Which of these is most hip dominant? Shut up, Trev. Go on tonight. Somewhere over here. As in JJ or Jess. Which of these movements is more hip dominant? Yep, is most hip dominant? Yep. Can you explain why?
Because the hip angle is acute.
Yeah, it's more closed, yeah. Which means that the muscles around the hip have moved through a greater range of motion, and they've probably developed more passive tension, which means that they can also make more use of their stretch reflex. Amongst other things, but those are some of the reasons. Yeah, that's excellent. And then which is most knee dominant? Anybody? The front squat. For all the same reasons, right? You've got a more acute angle at the knee, blah-de-blah, so on and so forth, all of those same things. But now we're talking about the quadriceps group as opposed to the hip musculature. Yep, good, cool. We're all on it. This is just a big picture of a foot with an arrow to say, this is your center of mass. Don't forget that. Midfoot, not your heel. I hear a lot of people talking about their heel as being like the center of mass. Using that as a coaching cue to get people on their heels is a little bit overused. I get the intent. The intent is to get them off of their toes. So you say, well, put your weight on your heels and you hope that they net out at about midfoot. But don't get carried away with that, like having people take their toes off the floor, for example. Don't get carried away with that. Anyway. This is what's happening when you lose the bar forward. that how you spell lose?
No, it's loose.
That's how
Loose.
you loose the bar forward.
It's something entirely different. Getting loose at the bar.
You can tell from this fella's traumatized expression that he's not in a happy place. He's about to end up in a world of hurt, right? If he's got a heavy weight on his back. And the reason for that is because he's created this big moment arm between where the bar is and where his center of mass is. And based on our understanding of biomechanics now, we know that for every degree of more leverage that the bar has, the more difficult a movement becomes. And if you have 200 kg on your back, even a small shift can mean a lot. It can be make or break between whether you're coming out of that squat or going back down. The low bar squat. So from now on, we just refer to this as the squat because it is our default squat. There's a number of reasons for that. The main one is because we use the squat to strengthen the hips, but we also use it as our primary strength lift. And of all of our squat iterations, you get the most weight on the bar once you've mastered the movement out of a low bar squat. Another big reason is because when the bar shifts from here to here, it's also much closer to your hip than if it's here. You see that? So that means that the amount of shear and the amount of torque experienced by your spine is less. And all of those are good reasons for using the low bar squat. You can go through my rationale here in your own time. I'm not going to read that whole essay. Another great thing about a low bar squat is that Matt can attest to this. It requires a lot more mobility out of your thoracic spine and your shoulders. If you're jacked up in your shoulders or your T-spine, this is quite a difficult position to get into. And so that's just an extra little bonus, is you can have people working on their mobility while doing heavy squats.
Independent where the dysfunction is in the shoulder, right? Like if it's a extension versus flexion issue. I actually prefer this squat because my issue was, at least with my shoulders, more so in the overhead position. So moving up into like a front bar squat was really difficult for me. Whilst I had issues here, look, my shoulders were just pathetic all around, right? But,
not only that, but T-spine extension as well.
yeah.
And that's in large part, particularly for Matt, who embraced the low bar squat fairly quickly, is it shows up as being more of a motor control problem. Generally, if someone goes from not liking an exercise to liking it over the course of 2 weeks, that tells you that it wasn't a mobility restriction that it was making uncomfortable for them. It was more just a motor control thing. But yes, anyway. These are all the specifics on how I like to do a squat. But I'm not going to read over those. We'll just talk about those when we get into the gym. Here are some of the cues that I like to use. We'll talk a little bit more about the art of cueing later on, but generally you want to use cues that are no more than 2 or 3 words long. And you also want to coach your cues before you use them, so that your trainee knows what your cues mean. Because there's no use in saying to somebody, you know, pack your shoulder or screw your feet into the floor. Most people will just say, I have no clue what that means, right? And they've also got a heavy bar on their back. So you need to coach the cues before you use them, and also make them relatively short. We'll get into a bit more of that. Here's just a good example of a high bar versus a low bar squat position, and you can see how much more engaged his back musculature is in the low bar versus the high bar. Everybody see that? What that means is he's just got a more stable platform to rest the bar on when he's in that low bar position. The front squat. It's not the same thing, right? It's not really the same movement anymore. It's quite dramatically different in terms of what's going on. It seems like a slight shift or just a alteration of the same exercise. It's not. It's completely different. And we work different musculature. Like we said, this is far more knee dominant. Some people, a lot of reputable people, say the front squat's more applicable for athletes because it more closely resembles the jumping motion. We'll get a little bit more into this when we talk through the kinesiology slides, but you don't want to get too caught up on specific strength before somebody can demonstrate general strength.
Just a side note, who suggests that, sorry?
Front squats?
Yeah.
All sorts of people.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
I'd categorically disagree. Anyone else have a problem with that sound? Yeah? Bizarre.
Yeah.
Bizarre change. Anyone know why I might disagree with that? Just as a general rule?
Who are you disagreeing with?
What's that?
What's the
So
disagreement?
this is more transferable to vertical leap, so vertical jump. Anyone know why I might not like that? And you can disagree, clearly there's some debate on the topic.
It's way more pressure on the knees.
Well, yeah, that, but because why, right? Like what are we primarily engaging, or when we take off, right, from a jump, what are we recruiting predominantly here? We're looking at hip extensors or hip flexors? Yeah. Well, at least that's my school of thought, right? And what are we training as a primary focus when we low bar squat versus front bar squat or front squat? So intuitively, to me, and I've done no research there, and this could be different or indifferent to what others think, but I would certainly suggest the low bar squat would be
Is it
more
more the
beneficial.
position they get into though?
Yeah.
Or,
Horizontal vertical force.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
so I think that's probably why that's more applicable to that
Yeah.
jump rather than
Yeah, but true force is true force, right? Like if you're producing more force, if you're training more strength in a specific muscle group, I think people get too caught up in anatomical position, right? Like I've heard swimmers saying before that because people leap off the blocks in more of a sagittal plane or a frontal plane, right?
Just more horizontal and vertical.
Horizontal leap, yeah.
Yeah.
That they should do all sorts of weird things, that launch off walls like to the side and stuff. I'm thinking, hold on, you've just sort of fundamentally disregarded the principles of strength, right? Like and production of force.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic. I just want to touch on it briefly. They're right. They're actually right. Front squats are more transferable to a vertical jump. Just through the principle of specificity, right? But you can get caught up in that. For example, if you start getting somebody, and I've seen this, if you start to get somebody like an overhead athlete, like let's say a baseball pitcher, if you get them working through their throwing mechanics, holding onto a heavy dumbbell, wouldn't that also transfer best to their sport because it's mimicking what their sport does? Well, yes, by the principles of specificity it would. But does that seem like a good idea? Probably not, right? Same thing goes here. General strength transfers well to specific sporting goals. General strength does. And a low bar squat is our best exercise for developing general strength. So some strength coaches get caught up in working on movements that specifically replicate sports movements, whereas others tend to focus more on just developing good strength. And we just know that someone who can squat 600 pounds versus someone who can squat 200 or 300 pounds, they're going to tackle you harder, right? Someone who squats 600 pounds is going to tackle harder than someone who squats 200 or 300 pounds. And that movement has nothing to do with squatting. That person is just a lot stronger. We know that someone who squats that much heavier is a lot stronger. General strength versus specific strength conversation is something that's
More of an S&C concept, but
Yeah, it is.
One that's widely and like even circles that I get around in.
I think there's a lot of people come unstuck with like that concept where they focus so much on the power on that output of power, but you can't basically, you don't have that power there to translate if you don't have good basic strength. You've got to have that, you've got to have that basic
Power is
foundation
just strength
first.
expressed quickly, right?
So, yeah.
So strength is still the foundation here. And so you want to focus more on building general strength before you get into anything that's super specific. That's all. It's an interesting conversation, maybe for another day. Anyway, this is a important point here. You don't want to work on the front squat too early on in a trainee's time in the gym, because they're two different movements, and a lot of the time people that are learning to squat will struggle with using their hip hinge correctly and using enough hip hinge, because somewhere, I don't know where they learn it, but a lot of people learn that they need to stay incredibly vertical while they squat. Their back is fragile, they need to be vertical. None of these things are true, unless you've got a bar on your front. And so if you're learning these two skills concurrently, they can cause some unnecessary noise in terms of, if you've just been front squatting, you try to back squat, you may try to front squat your back squat, if that makes sense. You want to probably focus on developing one of the skills first until it's very well ingrained, and then focus on the front squat. And that's why the front squat's more a stage 2 or 3 exercise, something that I wouldn't necessarily use first thing in somebody's strength training. Yeah, what that guy said. If you're trying to develop hip drive and posterior chain strength, use squat. If you're trying to develop vertical specific force production or work on your quads, do a front squat.
Unless you mean I'm just doing low bar always.
Yeah. The high bar back squat is a bit of a hybrid between the two. This is slightly facetious, that you can use a high bar squat, still a hell of a lot better than, say, a leg press. But that being said, I'd prefer you know why you're doing a squat and you choose the exercise that best targets that need. Whoa! Forgot about this slide. That's a lot of text. You can read that on your own time. The biggest takeaway here is probably here, that pressure is equivalent to force over some given area. And as your knee goes through a greater range of motion, the area across which force is being applied also increases. So yes, the knee experiences more internal joint forces as you go into greater depth, but the area over which that force is experienced also increases, and so the pressure felt by the tendons is a little less, not a super important point, guys. This is just if you're interested in why it is that deep squatting is better for your knees than partials. The deadlift, it's essentially how we pick heavy things up, right? And technically it's a little bit easier to learn than the squat. Some people struggle with squats for a number of weeks before they get it right, whereas most people you can coach through how to deadlift correctly within one session. And it's got great utility, right? It's incredibly difficult, builds back strength better than anything else that we do in the gym, both lower and upper. It's similar to the squat in that it heavily recruits the hip, but it's a bit more horizontal than vertical. Some of the key differences is we don't get to use the stretch reflex, right? Because the deadlift, by its name, starts from a dead stop. And the joint angles also change. It's generally more closed at the hip and open at the knee. Shorter range of motion. The bar position is safer, right? It's not actually on your back. Means that we can load this up just about as heavy as you can lift. Because if you fail, you can drop the bar. If you fail under a squat, you're in big trouble, right? So you never really, unless you're a specialty athlete who does this as your sport, chances are you're not doing a whole lot of absolute strength testing with your squat. Whereas with the deadlift, you can quite easily. As long as your back stays relatively neutral, you're always in a safe place to drop the bar. That means the limiting factor for most folks will come down to grip strength, just whether they can hold the bar or not. Kettlebell and hex bar deadlifts are really good variations of the deadlift, particularly for people with back pain. Why do you think that is, Tim? Any ideas? Anyone got any ideas? Does everyone know what a hex bar is? It's the one you stand in, right? Like it's got bars either side of your body. You're standing in the middle, and then you have plates either side of you.
Some people call them a trap bar as well.
Yep, trap bar or hex bar. Yep.
Mate, no one what's that?
No one's got any ideas.
Low position.
I was going to say position because you're lifting from there as opposed to.
Yeah. The bar's just a bit closer to your center of mass, right? The bar doesn't have the same leverage as if you have to hold the bar in front of your body. So it can be a little bit safer. The kettlebell, both because of that, because you have it between your feet with your kettlebell deadlift, but also your hips don't travel back as far when you pick up a kettlebell, and so the leverage changes at the hip as well. And of course, less leverage for the bar means less stress on your back as a general takeaway. Technique, just don't worry about it too much at this point, guys. We'll go over that in the gym. Oh, by the way though, if you're not keeping your arms straight while you deadlift, you're going to rupture a bicep. I just had a client doing a Tabata group fitness class, which I told him not to do, and he's torn his bicep. They were doing deadlifts at super high intensity and under incredible pressure from the instructor to do them faster.
What grip are you teaching with the deadlift?
Yeah, great question. My general rule is, unless you're doing singles, doubles, or triples, you should just be double overhand and save the alternate grip for those lifts. Did I say that right? Singles, doubles, and triples need to be alternate grip potentially. Everything else overhand, if you can. People that have already been training the deadlift for some time will struggle with that because you'll probably have to load them off to bring their grip strength up. So be it. You can get a bit carried away with that though. Like that, a lot of people talk about the changes in the anatomy of the spine and the scapula with an alternate grip. It's pretty marginal. I mean, there's a little bit of asymmetry through the shoulder joints, which plays into the scapular position a little bit, which plays into the spine position even a little bit less. It's not a huge deal. The biggest problem with the alternate grip, when you put someone into a supinated grip like this, their grip becomes more bicep heavy. And if you see a heavy lifter doing deadlifts when they rupture a bicep, it's generally on the supinated grip where that happens. If someone's gonna bend their elbow during a deadlift, which you should never ever do, it's gonna be on that underhand side.
What about a hook grip? You a fan of it?
Don't like a hook grip in a deadlift, no.
Just one.
Too heavy, it's tough to maintain.
Yeah, some people still use it.
Yeah.
I do.
Do you? Okay.
I guess that's probably more ollie lifting.
Yeah.
Because I'm getting ready to clean, but yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For the Olympic lifts, like we said in the grip slide, if you're coming off the floor, the difference is the deadlift portion of a clean, for example, is much, much lighter than your maximum deadlift weight, right? Like if I've got, multiple plates and I'm trying to do a hook grip, it's quite a compromised position for your thumb to be in. It takes a decent amount of the distraction of the joint. Again, a little bit personal preference, but that's why I don't like to use a hook grip in a deadlift. But yeah, really, really good question, and that's some of the practical stuff that I love that you guys bring up while we're going through the slides. This is a thruster, a glute thruster or a hip thruster, whatever you want to call it, and a specialty rack. It's not a great example of a thruster. I've actually included it for that specific reason. Some of the cool things about why I like thrusters. This last point, you need full hip extension, something that she doesn't have here. She's hyperextended through her lumbar, right? You guys see that? You really want to be in a fully extended hip position. People that are tight through their hips may not be able to get their hip fully extended, and they're generally the people that you want to be working on correctives for their hip restrictions before you make them do an exercise that demands full hip extension. Everyone see that? Everyone see that she's hyperextended through her low back? Cool. Also the glute ham raise, Nordic hamstring curl. In the conventional bodybuilding circles that most of us learn to lift from, these exercises aren't common. I know a lot of personal trainers just don't know what these exercises are. Feel free to look them up and watch a video, and again, we'll go over them in person at the gym. Here we are again with a really reputable coach, coaching obviously a specimen of an athlete, but he's not in an optimal hip position to be lifting from. This is a football NFL athlete, and they tend to be stuck in extension in this lower cross position where they're in an anterior pelvic tilt and they're very lordotic, and he's demonstrating that in an exercise where we want him to be fully extended as opposed to in that hyperextended position. You guys see that? Like he's sticking his butt out, right? That's not optimal for a GHR. Here goes another expert. Looks good there. Looks pretty good there. Looks pretty shit there. You guys see that? Again, he's anterior tilt. Lumbar hyperextended. Your glutes aren't switched on particularly well in that position, and you want them to be. But yeah, that's a GHR. One of the main differences between a glute ham raise and a Nordic hamstring curl is where you're anchored from. So in a GHR, you're anchored from the hip. In an NHC, you're moving from the knee. So the knee is anchored. It's much, much more hamstring dominant as opposed to using the glutes and the low back like a GHR does. But both awesome exercises for developing strength, hypertrophy, and injury resilience, particularly in the knee and in people that are prone to hamstring strains. Just some of the general tips that are covered in those previous slides, but let's just talk about a few of them first. Screwing out the feet, gripping hard, weight placement, the breathing, like we talked about for the ranked novice. We want them just using a rhythmic and consistent breathing pattern. For stage 2 and above, we want them working through the full or partial Valsalva breathing. Rip tuck's a massive one that I'm very fond fond of coaching people through getting their ribs into a better position. We'll talk about that more later too. Vision, this is something I see all the time, just all the time, and I'm not sure, it seems like it's kind of the elephant in the room for me, but you walk into any gym, you see people doing deadlifts, they'll be here like this, and to a lot of people that'll just look like a good deadlift position, right? What's wrong with that picture? Yeah, cervical hyperextension. Like, I'm not sure why that would be such a common thing.
I have a hypothesis. Mirrors.
Yeah, mirror.
Yep.
I'm serious.
100%.
I'm almost 100% certain the reason not everyone, but majority of people do that is because we've been trained, ill-advised, perhaps is a better word,
To watch your form in the
watch
mirror.
your form, check your form, check this,
Yeah,
check
I
that.
tend
Everyone's
to
always
agree.
looking at themselves, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with squats.
I tend to agree. If you go into a weightlifting gym where mirrors are a little bit less common, that poor form is also less common. But then you ask yourself, is that because the coaches are better?
Yeah, it's probably
you can't-
multifaceted, right? It's
yeah,
not
you
just the
can't-
mirrors.
Like most things, it's multifaceted. But yeah, I think mirrors are probably a big part of it. Anyway. Unilaterals. So someone who's a real champion of using single leg work is a coach named Mike Boyle. So much so that he no longer uses heavily loaded squats in his gym. He uses heavy lunges in their place. And we can scoff at that all we like, for those of us that love squats. But the truth of the matter is, this is one of the very best strength coaches in the world, and he consistently delivers the most injury resilient athletes in the world. So he's, when he speaks, I tend to listen to him. Not that we necessarily have to stop squatting.
Unilateral, maybe? We're always fond of the unilateral front squat. That's the case I'd make for a...
Oh yeah, you're talking about like using a partial...
Yeah, even a boxer, box squat or something.
Yeah, single leg box squat.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Anyway.
he's busy loading his athletes with, massive weights, like 160 kg rear foot elevated split squats. Just huge amounts of weight.
He's pretty prone to being on the side of very specific, right? Like if you look at majority of sports, obviously generally speaking, we're in swing, stance and various other, but we're moving off one leg majority of the time, right? We're leaping off one leg, we're sprinting, we're running, etc.
Yeah.
Is that why he would have that?
Yeah, that's his main case.
That's his main,
Yeah, his main thing is most of the time athletes are on one leg.
Yeah,
So
it's
we
a
need
good
to train on
good
one
point,
leg.
right?
Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, so that's just an interesting little point. A lot of people don't do much single leg work, and most people don't find the ceiling for strength with their single leg work. That's why when Coach Boyle comes out with some of the numbers that his athletes are using in their single leg work, it's like, wow, like we didn't know you could get that strong. Literally, no one else was trying to use this as a primary movement. No one else. Everyone's been using squats and deadlifts forever, and using the lunge potentially as a finisher or as an accessory strength exercise. And he's come along and said, yeah, I just don't do squats at all anymore outside of our mobility work. He says that it's still important to be able to squat, just not to load it particularly heavy. So that's quite interesting. To go along with that, when I was looking for images of the squat, it was incredibly difficult to find anybody lifting any amount of weight in Google Images when they lunge, and that kind of gets to Coach Boyle's point again, is that generally people squat with just puny weights. Even this guy, like, he's a big dude, he should be lunging with a lot more weight than that in my mind. But
What is that, a 70 pounder?
I don't know.
Ivanko 70 pounder?
Not particularly heavy for that guy's size, that's for sure. But yeah, the lunge or the split squat. Do we call it a lunge here? We call it a split squat in the US.
It's a lunge more often here, but it should be a split squat. Yeah.
Yeah, the way they're differentiated in the US is that if you're static, if you're just moving up and down on one leg, that's a split squat. If you're moving in some way, walking or alternating, that becomes a lunge. But it's all semantics to
I
me.
think thinking back, I was taught static lunge actually
Yeah.
to differentiate.
Yeah. So was I in New Zealand. Yeah, that's what we used as well.
Static.
Yeah, static lunge. Again, the lunge works the knee through its full available range of motion. AROM is active. And the hip through the deeper half of its active range of motion, which is part of the reason why lunges are the best way to develop glute DOMs. If you want a sore butt, do heavy lunges. It'll get you every time. And what I mean by that is through the deeper half of your available range of motion, because in a strength lunge, the hip's never fully extended, right? Like you never get, I don't know how to do that here. I'd have to do something like this to hit full hip extension, right? Whereas when you're lunging, you stay in hip flexion. So the tension is always on the glute throughout the entire motion. And in a fairly stretched position, which is why it's so good for traumatizing glutes. Some progressions, rear foot elevated lunges, that's what RFE stands for. Pistol squat, which is a single leg squat, are really good progressions for the advanced lifter doing lunges. Like the deadlift, lunges are also a really good place to train grip strength. I'm not one for doing wrist flexion and extension exercises, just lift heavy and generally your grip will stay up on par with the rest of your body. If you start using straps too early, or you can get some weird avoidance syndromes where people will be doing barbell lunges and things. I far prefer to do a dumbbell lunge because, like I said, it has a grip component. Another major unilateral lift, the SLDL or the single leg deadlift. Just using our exercise rationale, the main thing that's different about the SLDL to every other exercise we've covered so far is you can't load it nearly as heavily as you can the other ones. But it makes up for that because it's got other really good characteristics, like it has a high degree of motor control and balance challenge, right? Because one leg is swinging free. So I really like it for that reason, and you can still load it relatively heavily, just not as heavily as the other leg exercises we've covered. Almost entirely removes the involvement of the knee extensors, at least if you're doing it like this, heavily biasing posterior chain, particularly the hamstrings, right? As a general rule, if you're extending your hip with a bent knee, the glutes are in a more favorable position. If you're extending your hip with a straight knee, your hamstrings are in a more favorable position. We've already covered that, right, when we talked about glute bridge corrective variations. If we do a straight leg bridge on the floor, that biases the hamstrings. If we do it with a bent knee, that biases the glutes. Same thing goes here. Generally, if you're doing an SLDL, you'll be doing it with a relatively straight knee, but there's no need for that. Like Brett Contreras, who's a good trainer, good coach, he really likes an SLDL that uses more of a, another name for that is a shrimp squat, actually, kind of like a bent knee, single leg SLDL, because he's, as some of you may know, he's quite into his glutes. Pillar training. Okay, so just to summarize, we went over that kind of quickly, right? Because there's only so much I can talk about strength training outside of the gym. I'm not going to bother with the technique stuff until I can actually show you. But we've gone over, there's not a lot of exercises, right? And I've made a career out of coaching just those exercises. I don't really do anything else. I do squats, deadlifts, thrusters, GHRs, NHCs for my bilateral work. I do lunges and SLDLs for my unilateral work. That's pretty much it. Like if you program intelligently, people will get very strong and very good physiques doing those exercises. I'm not saying that you have to use those, but I'm just saying for me, those are the best ways to develop strength and physique, which are generally what people want. Anything else that any of you would throw in there? Any other leg exercises you like to do?
Or like step ups.
Yeah, step ups.
Very good exercise.
That's actually a great.
Front and side.
I'm pretty sure somewhere in here.
It was an honorable mention, but
Was it?
Didn't quite make the cut.
Yeah.
Where is it?
No, I thought the honourable mention was
That was in there, wasn't it? As in, like, it wasn't in there, but it was part of the honorable mentions.
For unilateral work, right?
Yeah. So,
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. There's just not a slide on it. It's right here. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Front foot elevated split squats are good for newbies as well. Excellent exercise.
Front foot elevated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Walk
works
me
more
through
of
that.
an upright torso. It's like I reckon it's a bloody amazing exercise. So
Mm.
it's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot more knee dominant, so good for knee stability. A lot of
Mm.
focus on VMO. And particularly for people that are tight early on, like
Mm.
even in the course of like one session, it's good dynamic stretch for that trailing leg hip flexor as well. Just have to watch that lumbar extension because they're really having to, contrary to the Bulgarian split squats,
Yeah.
more it's basically focused very much on that main concept is that upright torso and moving like a basically the it's like the elevator versus the travelator
Yeah.
scenario. So you're kind of leading actually from the hips.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah, like
good
you said, just
exercise.
more knee dominant.
Yeah,
Mhm.
really good. Uncomfortable but good exercise. I reckon it builds a really solid base for squatting patterns.
Okay. Yeah, nice. Yeah, cool. So a good way to. I really like that actually because one thing. So some of the ways that I categorize leg training is bilateral, unilateral, right? Hip dominant, knee dominant. And there's not a lot of really good knee dominant, unilateral strength exercises. So exercises that essentially target the quad group in a unilateral stance. My favorite is the single leg box front squat. Single leg box front squat. Yeah, you want to talk about VMO activity, that's probably the way to do it. I don't see a lot of application for the VMO in that position, and we can talk about the biomechanics of that outside of lecture, but I definitely see the application from a overall quad engagement. Have you seen any literature on VMO activity during that movement?
I think it's based around the bottom 10 to 15 degrees, that activation for the
Okay.
VMO.
Because the VMO is generally most active
Top end.
at top end. Yeah.
So like your Peterson step ups and Polygon step ups would be obviously if I was solely to focus on the VMO.
yeah.
So because the front foot elevated split squat's actually a regression from the Bulgarian.
Yeah.
The Bulgarian split squat, not a lot of people are going to be able to jump straight into that. So it's actually be front foot elevated, then basically go down to base and
Yeah,
then
rear
rear
foot
foot
elevated. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Yeah, cool. So those are some good examples. Front foot elevated, split squat, and step ups. Love both of them. Just because they're not in the slide deck, it doesn't mean they're not good. Anything else you guys like to do?
Good mornings.
Good mornings. Yeah.
Seated and standing.
Do you like to get your clients doing good mornings, or do you like doing good mornings?
Very few of my clients do good mornings. That formed a big base in my disc rehab in later stages, obviously.
Yeah.
Seated good mornings would probably be, there'd only be one of my clients at the moment I'd have doing good mornings, but
Yeah.
seated good mornings maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that risk reward things, yeah, it's only more for like advanced.
Yeah. Yeah, I love a good morning, but yes, it is. It's that risk reward playoff, and I think general pop risks outweigh rewards with a good. Does everyone know what a good morning is? I was surprised. I didn't know what a good morning was for the first few years that I was a trainer. Okay. Anyway, anyone else have anything to say in regards to training? I know Trev's been doing this a lot longer than anyone else, but surely you have some
What about
input. You'll train, right? Like, what do you do for legs? Don't tell me you just train exactly how I train.
Do you guys do you do much back extension, like 45 degree, as a
We'll get into it.
prelim for the GHR?
We'll get into it, yeah.
Cool.
Sarah probably does actually train like that, but everyone else, really?
And
Wow.
the other thing I add in, I can't remember the name of the stupid machine. It's
Mm.
that extension one where you're sitting on it and it
Reverse hyper.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, reverse hyper is great.
Yeah.
Again, we actually place that a little bit more pillar based because it's open chain, it's a little bit more isolated. I don't think of that as a primary leg strength exercise, but we definitely talk about it, yeah.
You can use the GHR for that as well, though. A lot of people will sort of.
Not for a reverse hyper. Oh, for.
You know,
Oh,
the
you could
fulcrum
turn around on
position.
it. Yeah.
So you can adjust
Yeah, you
the
can, yeah.
fulcrum position.
Yeah, I've seen that actually, yeah.
I think it's force yourself.
Yeah.
Mitch, what do
can.
you do for legs?
Squats.
Just squats. What sort of squats?
Hey?
What sort?
Low back.
Yeah, really. Nice.
Love it.
Love you, man.
Yeah.
If it wasn't inappropriate, I'd give you a hug.
I like you a bit more now. You should have spoke up earlier. I wouldn't have given you such a hard time.
Yeah.
Jess, what about you?
Yeah, squats.
Low bar?
Like,
You're more of a high bar girl at the moment, anyway. Yeah.
yeah.
Have you ever tried a low bar squat, Jess?
Probably. Like I did. I don't know.
Mm.
Maybe like I did CrossFit for like 3 months and that.
Yeah, you
I've
might have
probably
then.
done.
Yeah, not all boxes. It's bizarre. Actually, I've been to a few boxes that still do a bit of a mixed bag of squats. Yeah.
Most of them do high bar. It's because high bar squats are far more common in Olympic weightlifting circles, and most CrossFit coaches either come from no experience before CrossFit or they come from Olympic.
3 days.
Yeah, I call that no experience, or Olympic coaching experience. So high bars are more common there as well.
Not a lot of people are educated on differences, and they just think
No.
they just hop under the bar. They don't really know the concept of bar position,
No.
high bar and where the torso should sit, and low bar. They just position up.
Yeah,
This
that's
is
why
how
I
the bar
really
should
like
sit.
that slide of the silhouette with the plumb line of the low bar, high bar, and front squat side by
Yeah,
side, so you
yeah,
guys
so-
can see the way the angles are changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think implications are potentially lost on you until you spend enough time looking at the way the mechanics
Mm.
line up.
One thing I will say is, through your studies, and this has helped me, I'm a naturally inquisitive person, others aren't so much, and in our industry it can be a great downfall if you're not, because as JJ said, he does compound movements. He's got no rationale for why he does it, and that's no disrespect to you, because majority of people don't, but actually ask yourself the question, through your career in health and fitness, or just through life, why do I do something a particular way? And if you don't have a standardized answer, if you don't have a blueprint or a rationale, if someone asks you that question and you could just go, well, I don't know, I just do, that's not a good enough answer. And if that's the standard you hold yourself to in life, and especially in your career, you will not be successful, I can guarantee you that much. So just as a general rule, there's absolutely no problem with having debate. Me and Ralph debate things all the time, and generally I run off with the tail between the legs because he's a far more educated man. But regardless, I'll put forward my reasoning as to why I think something, right? And that's really the culture we want, especially at Tempest, but especially here with you, group of PTs. If you disagree, put your hand up and tell us why. Hopefully that way, through that discussion, we can help either affirm or reaffirm or inform you in a different way. That's been really big for me and Ralph especially. I've got no problem putting up my hand and saying, no, I don't quite agree with that, and this is why, right? And that's the most important thing. There's no problem going against what we might say or what literature might say, because what you'll find in the industry is there's a lot of debate across all of these topics, right? And you've got experts on one side, and you'll have experts that are just as highly credible debating it, right? So often you don't know where you sit. As long as you have a rationale in life, and especially in our industry, then you'll be alright. But make sure you have a reason for doing something. Don't just do something because the industry does it. I just do compounds first and then ISOs because, well, everyone does it, right? Like that's just order of operations. So make sure you have a rationale. Just on the side tangent there.
Yeah, absolutely, but it's a great point. I mean, that's part of what we're trying to develop here, right? That's why I said that might be the most important slide that we have, because it allows us to weigh up the pros and cons of
And on that note,
exercises.
don't think you can't ask Ralph why he's got certain, let's say,
Biases,
predispositions,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
It's something
Trust me, I
I've
have a
quizzed
reason
Ralph
though.
on a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, why do you think that, Ralph? Tell me, inform me.
Mm.
So please do the same if you're wondering, well, how did you just come to that? You know, because Ralph will often make some assumptions, and at least when I was going through the program, I was like, well, hold on a second, can you explain that to me?
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask that, guys.
Yeah,
because,
please do.
Yeah,
Please do.
he'll have an answer. Most of the time.
Moving on. 10 minutes, guys. Almost there. I think we're almost through the slide deck, so we've made pretty good time.
I was just filling in some time, and you were had a schedule.
This is critically important, though. So most people who have a lot of the same interests and ethos as me don't agree with me here. A lot of people say that squatting and deadlifting train the core. You don't need any extra work. I categorically disagree. And we'll talk about a little bit why over these next couple of slides. So, training the pillar, primary purpose of the trunk musculature. Know this, it's in bold for a reason. We use it to stabilize the trunk and to transfer force between your lower extremity and your upper extremity and vice versa. Extremities are arms and legs, right? For our purposes, the pillar includes muscles that act directly to stabilize the trunk. This is from the hip, the spine, and the scapula, so we're looking at an entire trunk system here. This is muscles like the lats, rhomboids, your six-pack, your obliques, your TRA, your QL, your multifidus, your spinal erectors, your iliopsoas, your glutes, even part of your quads, right? Rectus femoris crosses the hip, so it acts on the hip, so we can think of it as part of our pillar. That's a good general illustration of what all those muscles are. Although again, this is more how people would define the core, right? Like it doesn't get up into serratus, pec minor, lats, rhomboids, somewhere under those traps. You guys get the idea. That's how we think of the pillar. Which one of these exercises is better? Rollouts are harder. Yep. But which one's better?
And why? That's the question.
Multi-joint.
Huh?
There's 4 points.
Yeah.
It covers all of them.
Yeah.
It's just probably whether it's what you're actually doing.
Part of what we're talking about here is right here, right? As we transition from talking about leg training, which are prime movers, it's generally how we think about training is in the prime mover sense. It's worth noting the function of the muscle groups is vastly different. So the muscles of your legs are designed to do a completely different job to the muscles of your pillar. So leg training primarily involves the prime movers and focuses on maximizing force production. Pillar training primarily involves stabilizers and focuses on synchronized reflexive control of the trunk through all 3 planes of motion. So with that in mind, which of these is better and why? This exercise here is training the rectus abdominis as what? A prime mover or as a stabilizer? Prime mover, right? It's active spine flexion through the sagittal plane. This exercise is training the rectus abdominis as what? A prime mover or a stabilizer? It's an anti-extension movement, right? We're trying to stop our back from bowing by using these muscles, and that's generally what these muscles are designed to do. Another reason this is better is because you get a really good motor control component out of this. You get to reflexively have your midsection switch on as you roll out. Another benefit of the rollout is you can get that force couple between glutes and abs really well primed, so that when you turn on here, you also turn on there. You can't do that there. These are all reasons why the rollout is better than the sit-up or crunch, because it carries over into what that muscle is designed to do. Most of the muscles of the pillar are designed as stabilizers, postural stabilizers. So we want to train them to get better at that job as opposed to training them to do prime mover type tasks.
They've done EMG studies on the rollouts too. I think it's actually the highest activation, like in core entirety of all the core musculature. The rollout, pretty sure off memory.
Yeah.
Fairly recent, in the last 6 months, when you can see the study.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw the same one. Yeah.
When you're doing it, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you feel it, hey.
Yeah, no, you definitely
Yeah.
feel it. Yeah. So yeah, better on a bunch of different. We talked about this, right? This is part of our corrective strategies, talking about teaching pillar awareness. Those two things. Examples of good core exercises. What's the common principle of all of these movements? What could we categorize them as?
Hold stabilize rather than
Yeah.
Anti-extension.
Yeah, they're called anti-extension, but that's exactly what it is. They're stabilizing the trunk as opposed to actively creating movement. So all muscles can be used to actively perform a motion or resist the opposite motion. Right? And generally, stabilizers, their role is to resist the opposing motion. So muscles of the front of your trunk are designed to resist extension. But most people still train them to produce flexion, and that's not ideal. So these are some good examples of anti-extension. Good old prone holds, the plank. Which of these two examples of a plank is better, and why? It's better?
Yeah.
Okay, why?
You've got more stabilizers activating. Like.
You're talking about hands versus forearms.
Yeah.
Forget that.
Okay.
Any other reasons why that one's better? Yeah, I'm not referring to the forearm versus hand plank.
The bottom one better because they're more parallel. So there's more gravity working on them, so you have to stabilize more. So
Oh
it's
yeah, nice, good point. Also not what we're getting at. Like I said, forget the difference between hand and forearm and the relative usefulness. I actually do prefer to do a prone hold on hands, but that's not what I'm talking about here. Anyone else? You see that? That's an inactive shoulder blade. There's a dipping between the shoulder blades. This woman is in an active shoulder blade position, call it a plus position. She's got her glutes switched on, she's in a nice extended hip position. He is not. He's in an anterior tilt. We know that because you can see his big butt sticking up. Right? He's got good cervical position. So she's very slightly hyperextended, but pretty good. The main thing is activity between the shoulder blades, glutes switched on, stuff like that. If you've read this slide, that would have given you some clues. And in terms of finding rib neutral, spine neutral, scapulars being actively flush on the rib cage, things like that. Progressions of prone, push-ups, roll-outs, body saws, stirring the pot, stuff like that. Some anti-rotation and anti-lateral flexion exercises that I like, the pale-off press, side plank, asymmetrical carries. A lot of this stuff we've actually talked about already because a lot of our corrective strategies were based around improving pillar awareness and control. So there's some carryover here. This,
What do you call
just
that?
this, I'm not sure what that's called. But I don't ever want to see it at Tempest.
It's like a dance move or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is.
That's a new addition to the slide deck. Surely I didn't see that. I would have had a good laugh.
No, we had a conversation about that. It was
Did
just too long ago. Yeah, yeah, no, it's been there. It's been there. You got quite hot on the collar about why I included that. Some posterior pillar work. I don't like to do a lot of work on the posterior pillar because a lot of people tend to be too active in extending their spine, and these tend to promote that. You can coach against it, but they tend to promote that when they're working on their own as well. Most people need more help in anti-extension, which is everything that we've covered up until this slide. Some of the integrated movements that I really like. This is the integrated core movement or pillar movement. Really gets to the pillar, right? Because it's not only this section that's active, but your scapular stabilizers and whatnot to have the bells stay up overhead are super active as well. Quadruped kickback is also really, really good. There goes a picture of what Sarah was talking about, a guy using a dowel as tactile feedback on his positioning. One of the things I don't like about the dowel is that it typically coaches people to be collapsed, to be retracted through their shoulder blades while they're down there, and that's something that isn't ideal. Okay, so if that slide deck feels incomplete, it's because we didn't do any of the practical stuff, right? And if the FMS stuff is practical, this is even more practical, what we're going through now, the strength exercises. This is the end of it. Basically what I'm saying here is you can choose out of any number of exercises. Like Matt said, the important thing to us is that you have a rationalized method of choosing exercises, something that can speak to the pros and cons of using different movements. Like I said, you just build a training toolbox over time. And generally, what I've found is it goes from more complex to more simple as you get better at just finding the movements that work best for doing the things that you want to do. And you might be able to circumvent some of that learning by assimilating what more experienced coaches use. Yeah, this is a good slide. I'd recommend spending a little bit of time on these too, and coming back and visiting these before your assessment on practical strength coaching, because this is the type of stuff that I want to see you implementing when we go over that stuff. So just clear lines of communication, don't over-explain things or use too much jargon. Matt's one for heavy jargon, got heaps and heaps of grades.
Jargon till the cows come home.
There you go, power off, we've run out of power. Perfect timing, thanks. Thanks, thing. There it is, guys, all done.